Madeline, we're continuing our conversation about branding, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
I'm so glad you're here.
Me too. I'm very happy to be here. I love talking about this stuff.
I love talking to you because you love this stuff so much. And I love when we sat down to plan out this season, I remember walking away with a big smile on my face because I'm like, this girl doesn't just enjoy this, but she loves this. It's in your core. You understand the importance of author branding and branding in general. And it just shows. That's your brand, girl. I see that in your brand when we work together.
Yeah, my brand is branding.
Your brand is branding.
Yeah.
Okay. Love it. And I can't wait to see how that brand part of your life comes to life. And what a better time to talk about bringing a brand to life than on episode 2 of the emPowered Author Podcast on season 2 when we're talking about author branding, because we're starting 3 or 4 episodes in this season that talks about bringing your brand to life. How do you take that intangible and make it tangible? So I love that truly in each season of the emPowered Author Podcast that I get the chance to dig deep with an industry expert. And that's really what I'll be doing. So future episodes to come and in season 1, you'll notice that I really like to work and collaborate with people who understand authors, understand strategic marketing strategy, and help focus on the types of tactics that are going to elevate that author to reach their goals. And I find that every time I think about a marketing strategy and tactic, I'm always coming back to their brand. So I had to do season 2 be focused on author branding, because if you don't have that, we always start here.
Yes.
It's
always the first thing I think about when I'm doing any type of design is, what is this brand? What are its goals? What's it trying to do? How's it trying to make people feel? And then that's kind of my job to take that intangible and to make it tangible.
And the authors that we've had the chance to do author branding for, when it comes to bringing their brand into the everyday, it is so easy to do websites and marketing materials and presentations and products because they already have a brand that speaks to who they are.
That brand is absolutely the foundation, and it's kind of the guidelines and the rule book for how everything in your brand and your marketing strategy is really tailored to you and to your goals and to your brand.
Yes, and today we get to talk about we're kicking off the next 3 episodes on bringing your brand to life. But today's topic on branding is probably my favorite. I say that, watch, next episode I'll say it's my favorite too. But I love today's topic on branding because I think it's something that many people, when they think of branding, they understand that they need it, but they don't understand how it tells a story of their brand. So before I divulge today's topic, before we go any deeper, I want to take a moment and almost get a zipper and unzip you and understand your brain. Can you open up your brain and give us a minute to dive in and talk about what happens in your mind when I give you a call and say, hey, we've got an author that needs an author brand. So where do you start in that journey?
So the first step is kind of talking with that author and figuring out pretty much everything we discussed in the last episode. What is your brand exactly? What are your brand attributes, your goals, your values, the personality of the brand, the people you're trying to reach, and how you're trying to make them feel. And so once we have all that down, what this brand is going to be all about, I kind of start with my brainstorming process. So that can be a couple different ways of brainstorming. So that could be word brainstorming. So I just kind of throw a bunch of words together that explain and talk about the brand and how it wants to be seen. So that could be, maybe it's a confident brand, maybe it's a calming brand. So words like that. And then I start to draw imagery together. So when I say imagery, I mean just the visible parts of a brand. So I usually start with fonts and then icons or images that are going to be what that brand needs to relate, to its customers, and to show how that brand wants to be portrayed and what that brand is all about. So that's going to be, fonts that speak to the brand's personality and how the brand wants to be seen. And that's also going to be, icons or imagery that's associated with that brand and has that same feeling. And I just kind of like throw all that together, and it's a lot. But then, you start to narrow that down, what are the best fonts, what are the best icons, what are the best imagery for that brand to kind of take the intangible brand and make that tangible and express that visually.
So I would love to like just sit back one day and watch it all come to life as you start doing that. But the reality is also too, if anybody knows anybody who's an artist, like I feel like that's what you are. You shouldn't be considered a graphic designer. It's like a graphic artist because you can't say, well, I'm just going to do that. That's only going to take an hour. Maybe sometimes it does. Like sometimes you're like, oh, I've got this and I know, but other times you really have to think through this and you can't limit that thinking or you might miss out on something.
Yeah, I kind of think of it as a puzzle. Like you have all these different pieces of all these different things you have to think about, parts of a brand, and you kind of have to fit it all together in the right way or the puzzle's not going to turn out right. It's not going to look good.
Ooh, I like that analogy because I'm a big puzzle person, but I always start with the outsides first of a puzzle because that gives me structure and probably like you in your approach, you start somewhere because that's going to give you a place to narrow down and then you start to say, okay, well, I'm going to divide my puzzle based on colors and then I'll put that together. And same thing with your brand, as you're bringing it to life. Yep. Okay, we need to focus on fonts. Got that figured out. Now I need to figure out what imagery goes with it. Got that figured out. What colors brings it all together? So the brand puzzle. I love that, Madeline. That's really cool. And that is actually what we're dissecting now. This episode and the next couple is the brand puzzle. And how does that translate for authors? So I am pumped. So before we dive in today, I really want to challenge everybody listening to do something for me. I want you to take a look around. I want you to look around your space, your car, your room, wherever you're at. And I want you to realize the brands that you see. So, I see my Yeti microphone. I see my book brand. I see...
What brand is your drink?
Oh, that is a Beachbody brand. So I've got the tumbler, like all of these things. But we have like literally, we don't realize that they're all around us, right? But each thing I just shared has a different vibe and a different feel. So I want you to think about, even if it's the clothes you're wearing, like I'm a very brand loyalist on my clothes and it's for a reason because it's how it makes me feel, right? So I want you to think about those things and I want you to reflect on what do you notice, right? So for the microphone, even the font selection on my Yeti microphone is very bold and confident. So now I know that the microphone's going to be working for me, right? Versus my book cover that has a conversational vibe, which is, I want people to feel like they sit down and are having coffee with me when they read it.
Yeah, two very different brands to kind of contrast. One very soft and more friendly, another one that's more like bold and confident.
And I bet you, whether you're looking at the brand of the car in front of you at a stoplight or the Starbucks coffee that you're holding, you will notice that same thing. You will start to take note. I challenge you today to do that, to open your eyes figuratively and literally and observe the brands in your life and start to make those connections on how they're making me feel and why is that happening.
And I will tell you, once you start doing that, once you start like looking at these brands that are everywhere. I mean, we live in a branded world. Like brands are everywhere. Once you start looking like closely at all those brands, you won't be able to stop. It's kind of like, your eye will be opened and you won't be able to stop like looking at all these different brands and noticing these aspects of each brand and how each brand looks, but how they're trying to inspire a feeling.
I love it. I know. My husband will hate me later because we'll go somewhere and be like, oh my gosh, do you see that brand? Yeah, so just so you know, your significant other or your friends in your life might not like you today with that challenge, but it's it will help you also ensure that the brand that you're creating for your entrepreneur space is in alignment, because now as you start to realize how other things make you feel, you will begin to realize how your brand can make other people feel. So while we're diving into the different aspects of kind of a brand's identity and bringing the brand to life, we have to start where you start, Madeline. After you do the brainstorm, you typically start with figuring out the right fonts to speak that story.
Yeah, absolutely. Fonts are, they're crucial, because how are you going to tell people what your name is unless you're able to spell it out in some way? And the way that you choose to spell that out for people with a font is going to tell like a completely different story based on the font that you choose.
So when I was pulling together the emPowered PR group, it was really important to me that the conversation, that it came across conversationally. I wanted people to realize that the type of work that I do in the marketing space can be trusted and can be confident, but it also is a collaboration. So it's conversational. You're going to get something, but you're going to be a part of that experience too, right? Yeah. And that font was pivotal to me, for that situation. So when we talk about fonts, every font elicits a different feeling. And there's so many different types of fonts. So let's break down some of them. I wish this is kind of like a Jeopardy show. Madeline, do you like sans serif or serif font better?
Don't make me choose.
I won't.
Because they are both good in their own right.
Yes.
I think a lot of people today, they definitely tend to lean more sans serif, because it's very in to be more modern and more clean. Yeah. But I think both types have their place and they have their uses. That there's things that a serif font can portray that a sans serif just wouldn't be able to, and vice versa.
So for those who have no idea and think we're talking a different language, how would you describe a serif versus a sans serif font?
So a serif font basically has little lines on the end of the strokes of the letters, and a sans serif does not have that. They just have a clean end on the ends of the strokes.
So many times, like when I think of using a serif font, I'm thinking of, something that's like established, something that's like I think of my church, right? Like something that I trust, something that's been around for a while, an age-old confidence.
Yeah, it definitely has a more like classic, maybe a little old-fashioned feel to it.
Yes, but what that also brings with it is a specific audience that it connects with. And there are author brands out there that is pivotal to. A sans serif, or san in front of serif, means without the serif, which are those crazy little lines that you're talking about. That has a more clean look, in my opinion.
Yeah, it definitely feels more modern, more, with the times. It is more clean, it's more minimalist. So that has a very different feel too. It feels, more current. It can feel a little more adventurous, maybe, more hip, more young, whereas a serif will feel a little older.
I bet you if we did like a brand challenge and we took all these different brands and did some in serif and some in sans serif, people would be like, ooh, I just get different feelings.
It completely changes the way you perceive something.
Absolutely. So then you've also got a script font and a block font. Talk to me about those.
So script is going to feel more handwritten. It's like flowy, loopy. It's like what cursive is. Yep. And then block would be just, like a very heavyweight font.
Yeah.
It looks like it's made out of like blocks.
Absolutely. So I a little bit about Stephanie. How I learned business was because I decided when I was creating my book business, or about to launch my book, I was looking for how I would have the seed money to support everything I needed to bring my book to life. That and I'll share this story one day in a much larger way, but I ended up creating a wreath. And the wreath began a wreath business that quickly turned into like its own business, and it kind of went crazy on myself. And it helped me get the seed money I needed to be successful in my book world. I share all of that to say one of the number one best-selling wreaths that I would make had a monogram in the middle, and it was a script font, and people were coming out of the woodwork for finding a wreath where they could put their last name initial or a monogram in there with this script font, and it just spoke to this kind of classic farmhouse vibe. I paired it with boxwood, and it just kind of gave this like, I don't know, this like the chickens are in the back and you get the eggs and you just feel like home.
Yeah. And even within like that one category of type of font, like just saying script, I mean, there's so many different types of script fonts that some feel, they have like thinner lines. It's very clean. It feels more modern. Then you have more like classic, old-timey, old-school script fonts. So there can really be so much variation in the feel and the look of fonts, even within these categories that we're talking about.
Yeah. So I would suspect as you're thinking about bringing an author brand to life, you might go, this brand needs a serif font. Like, I just know that. But then you have to dive in and find, well, which type of serif? Yeah. Because there are some serif fonts that have a modern vibe to it. Still a classic, but modern or whatever. And you've got to play around with what that looks like. Or you might say it needs script and sans serif, like that variation.
Yeah, so these are kind of like very general categories, but there's just so many fonts that there's so much variation within these categories that there's really so much room to play around with different things.
Which is where the fun is, and figuring out what the right kind of option is. One of the recent author brands that we created, I mean, it was so much fun to see after you pulled their first logo together. You had like 3 or 4 different kind of font selections. And they were mixed together, and gosh, each one I was like, oh, I like this, I like this, I like this, but I like each for different reasons. And it was because of your font selection, I think, that kind of helped figure out how are we taking that energy and make it something.
Yeah, fonts absolutely play like a huge role in how people perceive your brand.
I think so too. And if you get really strategic with the fonts, realize that the font in a logo doesn't stop there. It can be used in other extensions in your marketing efforts, your website, your email campaigns, any marketing materials.
Yeah. Like we talked about, your brand isn't just your logo. It's kind of everything that represents you and that shows people who you are visually. So
Absolutely.
fonts are key, for your brand, and that you want to use them everywhere.
Absolutely. So while you're thinking about different types of fonts, you want to make sure that your font is legible. I think that's something even I struggle with a bit because I really am a big fan of script fonts. But some script fonts, certain letters of the script font don't make sense. So I'll use emPowered PR Group again as an example. When that brand was created, the graphic designer did not like what the P looked like in emPower, and she had to find a way. She may have even created that P because that she loved the rest of how the script felt, but that particular letter didn't pop in that certain way. So you have to make sure it's legible. You don't want people walking away going, "What in the world is that brand?"
Yeah, and that I come across that a lot, especially, working with fonts. But it's also like thinking about that different fonts have different uses where we talk about, if people are able to read it. So if you're using a script font in your brand, you would never use a script as like a paragraph.
Right.
Because that's very hard for people to read a lot of text in a script font. So you would never, ever want to use a script font with like a lot of body copy.
It should be used as like an accent.
Yes. Yeah, like a header or even sometimes just in your logo.
Yeah.
A lot of the time I tell people, don't use the main font in your logo elsewhere because you want your logo to stand out. You want it to be very recognizable. You don't want it to blend in with the rest of your brand. It needs to stand out, and it needs to speak for itself.
That's cool. So I think you talk a little bit, what you just said was about variance and how it's important to, even if your logo or your brand comes to life and your logo has one font, it's important, I think, to have a couple of different fonts in your brand kind of identity, and make sure that some of those fonts have different variations and allows for bold or italics or what have you. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I would definitely say that, especially, if you have a script font in your logo, you're going to want something, since you shouldn't use a script in a lot of copy, you're going to want another font. Maybe it's a sans serif, which is very easy to read. You're going to want that you can use, for various purposes where you're going to need to put a lot of text.
Yeah, so I think you at least want 2 font options for your brand, sometimes 3.
Yeah.
Because you need something that's going to allow for variants and headers, and I'm thinking about like on a website or any like a one sheet or promotional flyer. And it just gives you options. It gives you options. If you don't have that and then you go to bring your brand to life, you're like, oh my gosh, well, I don't know. And you might have the most amazing logo, but you're still missing how to bring that brand into today.
Yeah, and there's kind of a balance to that, to where you want to have options, but you don't want to have too many options, to where you have so many fonts going on that people don't recognize your brand as being, this specific set of fonts.
Yeah, so it's this happy blend of enough but not too much.
Yeah, so 2 to 3 I would say is the sweet spot.
I think so too, absolutely. And you could probably get away with 2 if one of yours has several variance options that allow for a bold option, an italic, whatever. And for those who are listening that go, well, isn't that available all the time? No, it's not.
It's not.
It's not. All fonts are not created equal. No. And they just, they don't all have that capacity. I think you also want to ensure that you select a font that's going to really help drive home those feelings and connect with your audience. Like I want to like drill this into everyone's mind. You want it to feel right for you, but it has to feel right for your audience. You have to do it in a way that's going to recruit the right people, the types of people that you want to work with. So when you and I were kind of brainstorming around this topic, I loved how you were like, all right, so let's say we've got a bank and we've got a clothing store, right? The fonts for those would be very different.
Yeah, because they're 2 different brands. They're trying to attract 2 different types of people for different reasons. Or maybe they're trying to attract the same type of person, but they want them to do different things. They want them for different reasons. They want to be perceived in different ways because they're offering, a brand promise that's different to this other brand. A bank's going to want to come across as more established. They want to be seen as trustworthy, maybe a little old school. They're seen as, very stable and steady. Whereas, like a streetwear brand, they're going to want to seem very modern, very hip, fun, fresh, something that you want other people to see you in. So they're going to want to seen very differently. And so since they want to be seen differently, they're going to want to use, fonts that have different feelings, that are tailored specifically to their brand and their brand promise and how they want to be seen and the types of people they want to attract.
Absolutely. So it's just a reminder and proof that you need someone who can overthink this stuff to help you, or you're not going to be thinking about it in that way. And however, the brand will create that, whether you think about it or not. So whether you put that energy in or not, that is still going to elicit a feeling, an emotion, and it will recruit a certain amount of people. Fonts can set the tone in regards to, is it a conversational brand or a very professional brand, or one of each. And it can, help give the vibe on, is it easygoing? Is it focused? Is it determined? All of those are pivotal to bringing a brand to life. And I really, really want to ensure that anyone listening realizes this, that when you know your goals, your brand and the fonts that are associated with it can help you reach who you need to reach and be unapologetic about it. I found when we were talking about in episode 1 of the season and strategy, when we were like, who's your target audience? Sure, you might have a business or your message might be impactful for everyone. But if you think about it that way, you will reach no one. So focus on who you want to reach, who you think you can help the most, and allow your font to speak to them and be unapologetic about it. Also know how you're going to use your brand. Are you going to be making products with it? If so, you might want to make sure that your font that you select has enough weight. There's nothing worse than deciding that you want a t-shirt made and your font is not weighted enough. Ugh, that's like a marketer's nightmare.
Yeah, so the fonts definitely have to be very, very functional, or at least, a couple, maybe one of them needs to be where it can be printed and be easy to read, and that they're able to print it.
Yeah, and are you going to one day want to create a website? Probably. So make sure that you have fonts that have a font family with lots of variations, because that will help you on your website create visual interest without going crazy with 100 fonts. So, these are things you want to think about. This is why it's important to always have strategy front and foremost. The last thing here that I want to just acknowledge is under some things to consider is copyright laws. Some fonts are kind of like royalty-free fonts, just like photos or music is, and others you have to pay a small price for it if you're going to use it in a commercial way. So be aware of understanding if that's needed, and make sure that you buy the rights for the commercial use if it's necessary. Madeline, fonts. We've already really dived in on a big part of branding, and there's really so many aspects to a brand. I really love, and I think this is probably the merge of the left and right brain that we were talking about last time in my life, how something that's so small has so much that goes into it.
Yeah, it really does. Like Jed, my job is to overthink things, and the difference between this font and that font can really, it's like the butterfly effect, just a tiny thing really affects everything.
It affects it all. Yeah, fonts are really, really important when you're thinking about strategy and how it's being used within a brand. So the type of font that you use tells a lot about you, your brand story, and the people that you want to engage with. It really is setting the tone in ways you don't even know. Madeline, this was fun. Will you do it again with me? Can we have another chat?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm totally available at any time.
Awesome. Well, we're going to dive in. We have 4 more episodes left in this season of The Empowered Author that's focused on all things author branding. And next up, we're talking about the battle between icons and logo type. There's a lot to be learned in this next episode, and I'm really excited to have you on board to have the conversation on this battle or debate, or really just understanding what an author needs to bring to life. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, see you over there.